in Belize, Vice Consul of the Consular Section, Robert Keane. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Marlene. Good morning, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Rob, it's so nice to have you in. You look so comfortable. You're a Belizean, sir. You're a Belizean. But we know the topic is definitely one to reckon with. A lot of people look forward to it. There's so many questions that would bombard the U.S. Embassy because everybody is fond of the U.S. You know, it's somewhere that we love. Now, the summer is here, and a lot of people will be heading up or want to head up to the U.S. But let's get into it in terms of visa application. Where do we start in terms of applying for a visa?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. The best place to start is our website. So you can just go straight to the U.S. Embassy website. It's bz.usembassy.gov. You can also just find us by Googling U.S. Embassy in Belize. And their very first tab on that website is for visas. And you click on that, you select what kind of visa you're looking for, whether it's a non-immigrant visa or an immigrant visa. And then it's going to take you through the process. You first go to a website, you'll create an account there. Then you'll fill out your application form, your DS-160 application. That's the one that's going to ask you all those questions about your previous travel, if you've had a visa before, things like that. And then you'll make your payment at Scotiabank, and once the payment's posted, you can make your appointment at the embassy, and you can come in on your appointed day and time, and you have your interview, and if the visa's approved, you pick it up and you go on your way. Enjoy your trip to the U.S.
Let's talk about the visa options that are available to Belize at this time. We know there was the suspension of the temporary worker visa, so that will not be something that people can apply for this year, right?
Yes.
What are the other visa options, and how does one know which is the visa they should be applying for?
Well, that's a great question, and the website actually helps you out a lot of that with a lot of that, because it actually directs you. It asks you a series of questions. What do you want to do in the United States? And that's going to guide you to the correct visa class for you. So as you mentioned, yes, the H-2 temporary worker program was suspended for Belize for this year, and that'll be reviewed again next year. But all other visa classes are still open to Belizeans. Any other type of visa that you could want. There are other types of temporary work visas in the United States. There are student visas, visitor visas, all those other visas, they have not been affected at all by the changes. So there's many, many reasons that people travel to the United States, and there's a visa for every kind of reason.
Now, this is also a process where I know a lot of people get quite nervous. It's an investment with
It
no
is.
guaranteed return.
Right.
And oftentimes people are concerned of behaviors they may have had. Maybe they got a parking ticket, you know, with a rental that they never paid. I don't know. There could be many things in many infractions. What's your advice to people in terms of assessing whether or not they should apply?
Well, the most important thing is be honest on your application. When you're filling out that application form, we know that some people, they get a little intimidated by it. They're not comfortable maybe with the internet, or they're not comfortable with the application form itself. And so maybe they get help, they go to an internet cafe, or they have a friend or family member help them fill it out. But they have to remember when they come in for that interview, they're responsible for all the information in that form. And so the most important thing is to be honest. We do have people who come in and say, yes, I was arrested for this, I had this infraction, you know, it was 15 or 20 years ago, I can explain, I've had no trouble since then. And those people can get visas. It's going to depend on the person's circumstances, but the most important thing is to be honest. When people don't tell us that they've been arrested and we later find out, even if it's a minor infraction, that hurts the credibility of the applicant. Then we have to ask, well, what else weren't they telling the truth about? So honesty is the best policy when it comes to applying for your visa.
You did mention credibility, and a lot of people would definitely try to keep that in mind. But one of the things, and we've been hearing about this for so long, you need to have a tall bank book, you need to have so much money, you need to have land, you need to show that you're able to stay in, yes, you're employed, you need to be able to show that, you know what, this is your country and here is where you want to live. Now, if I go into the embassy, like for instance today, I'm going into the embassy, what am I required to take with me?
The reality is all you really need is your passport and a photo and your appointment letters. Those three things, and that's it. For most cases. Now, it's going to depend. There are certain circumstances. When you're applying for a child, for example, we're always going to want to see the birth certificate. If someone, for example, is importing vehicles, we're going to ask for custom clearance and things like that. But for the vast majority of cases, for the typical person who's going to visit a friend or a family member in the United States, we're not going to ask for documents. there's all these myths about, oh, I have to show all of my bank statements, I have to have an invitation letter, I have to have all these things. It's not true,
Employment
honestly.
letter?
Employment letter, no. I mean, we very, very rarely will look at something like that. And if there's ever a circumstance where we do need to see more documents, we're going to give you an opportunity to come back to the embassy and ask that. We never deny someone because they didn't show up with the document at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So the issue is really, what are they explaining? And so all the points that you talked about before, it's really the last point is the one that is true, which is that you have to show you have a reason to come back after a temporary visit to the United States. So that reason can be in a lot of things. It can be your job, certainly, but it can also be your family, it can be community ties, it can be a great number, it can be school. The point is that under US law, anyone who's applying for a non-immigrant visa, any kind of temporary visa, whether it's a visitor visa or a work visa, has to show that they have a reason to come back after that temporary stay. And that's the most important thing.
On average, how many applications for travel visas do you get?
In what time
In
frame?
Belize?
We get about anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 applications per year, I would say.
And the numbers that are approved on average?
I can't say the exact numbers of figures. I would say that I can tell you that the majority of people do get their visas. The majority of people who apply for a visa do get their visa. The approval rate fluctuates year to year, and because of the relatively small number of visas that we do here, just for comparison, we used to do 1,000 visas a week when I was in New Delhi, India.
Wow.
So it's a little different scale.
Totally different population.
Yeah. But because of the relatively small numbers, it can fluctuate a lot week to week, month to month. So I can't say the exact figure.
This one of the scary things, especially, and I say this because there are a lot of students, and students. One of the things that is actually gifted to a student is a trip to the U.S. And they would say, you know what, I was denied because they think that I'm going over to live when in reality I just want to go for a week, 2 weeks, because I'm being gifted a trip to the U.S. So what do you say to students or families who are planning on going in because they want a visa to go and visit just because it's a gift?
I totally understand that, and we welcome visitors to the U.S. And I want to say, first of all, that I see my job as helping to promote those ties between the U.S. and Belize.
Yeah.
That friendship, that relationship, allowing people to go visit their family members, allowing students to go study in the United States and build up their skill set so they can come back and provide those skills here in Belize, allowing somebody to go purchase equipment for their business. All of those things, those bonds of trade, family, all of those things help to build the partnership between the U.S. and Belize. So we want to facilitate legitimate travel. That's the whole point of the visa program. As far as students specifically, it always depends on the specific case. I mean, the individual student just has to be able to demonstrate that they have those ties that are going to show that they're going to come back after a temporary visit. And sometimes that's more difficult for young people, especially if they've recently graduated, if they're not working, they're not married, they don't have necessarily the clear social or economic ties that are going to bring them back. They just have to be able to demonstrate. Maybe they can say they have plans. Okay, well, I've graduated, I'm not working right now, but I've been offered a job that I start in a few months. Or I just finished junior college, I'm planning to go for my bachelor's degree next. Something like that. And then if we can see those ties and they otherwise qualify, of course they can get the visa to travel.
Yeah. I'm sure you see a lot of people coming in, perhaps forgetting to bring essential documents, or just maybe putting in obstacles for themselves from the start. Let's take an opportunity to be able to educate the public on those issues.
Thank you so much. There's a number of things that we want to see, and there's some things that we don't need to see. So one important thing is whenever someone's applying for a child, we want to see the birth certificate, and we also want to see an authorization letter from the non-applying parent. Or if one parent has sole custody, a custody letter from the Belize Family Court. We can accept that in lieu of that. Another thing is pictures. We sometimes have problems with the pictures that people upload. People like to upload some selfies. People like to upload their Facebook photos. We know everybody wants to look like Kim and Kanye on Facebook, but when you're going for your visa interview, we want to make sure it's a clear shot of your head, white background, taken within the last 6 months. You know, simple, straightforward photo like the ones that, the first example that we have up there.
No filters necessary.
No filters necessary, exactly. You're beautiful just the way you are. No need to embellish anything.
Kim is on there.
So we spoke of no selfies. We spoke of the authorization letter from the non-applying parent. The child, do they need to present themselves for the visa application, for the visa interview?
Children under 14 do not need to be present for an interview. So that's a great point. Children under 14, senior citizens who are over 79 years old also don't need to come in for an interview. They can just submit their application. They do everything else the same way, but they can just drop off their passport and their appointment letter, and we can go ahead and adjudicate the visa without them coming in for an
So
interview.
no one has to do the interview for an elderly person?
No. Nope.
That will just be based on their online application?
Right. And now, we always have we reserve the right to call someone in if we have questions, if we see their application and we're curious, oh, wait a second, we're not sure about this prior travel, or if there's questions about, past history or something like that, then we might call the person in for an interview. But in general, children under 14, senior citizens over 79, and then the other program that a lot of people aren't aware of, if you've had a full validity visa and it's expired within the last 12 months, so the last year, you can apply without coming in for an interview. So if you've had, for example, a full 10-year B1, B2 tourist visa, multiple entry, and the visa's not damaged, it hasn't been canceled, there's been no other, you haven't changed your name, anything like that, and it expired within the last year, you can submit that interview waiver. In some cases, we have to, as I said, call someone back in to ask more questions. But a lot of people could avoid having to come in for an interview, missing a day of work, whatever it is.
I'm so glad that you're clearing that up, because there was once folks were saying that if you've had a visa, if you received a visa back in probably 2006, 2007, and you want to reapply, up to today's date, you want to reapply, then you don't have to go into the U.S. Embassy. Is that so? So we could try and clear this up.
Yes. So if it was a full validity visa,
Which means 10 years.
10 years.
So right. So when you're talking about a tourist visa, that's 10 years, multiple entry. Now, different classes of visa have different validity. So, for example, if you're working on a cruise ship, you might have a C1D visa. The maximum validity on that is 5 years. But if you had a 5-year C1D visa with multiple entries, and it's not damaged, your name is the same, all the information is the same, and it expired within the last 12 months, you don't need to come in for a new interview. If you had a 10-year tourist visa, multiple entry, and it expired in the last 12 months, you don't need to come in for a new interview, unless we have further questions
Is
for
that option on the online form?
Yes, actually, and the online form directs you to that. It asks you a series of questions that ask you when your last visa expired, and for some reason, we still have people coming in for interviews that don't need to, but we encourage you, if it's expired in the last 12 months,
So you
please
have a
just drop
1-year
off.
span between the expiration of your visa and possibly having the interview waiver. And of course, that's up to the
Exactly.
discretion of the
Right.
embassy.
But in most cases, if someone's eligible for interview waiver, we can proceed with the application without an interview.
If I have to attend probably a meeting in the U.S., my visa will probably be up this Saturday, and the meeting is probably tomorrow. Am I able to go to the U.S. with this?
Yes, you can travel right up to the very last day of validity on your visa. So a lot of people are confused about that. They ask, oh, I only have 3 months left on my visa. Can I still travel? Yes, you can travel up to the very last day. And then remember, it's the Customs and Border Protection officer at the port of entry, at the airport, that passport inspector. They're the one who's determining how long you can stay. So normally they give you up to 6 months. Sometimes they might give you less than that. Depends on the circumstances. And it also depends on your visa class as well. But if you get there on the very last day, you don't have to worry, oh, my visa's expired, I'm out of status. No, they stamp you in for 6 months. You're okay to stay for that period of time.
I appreciate that you said that. I always remind people that the visa just gets you to the immigration booth.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
It's really the
It
opposite
gets you on the
that they
plane.
say.
It doesn't get you
Get you
into
on
the
the
U.S. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I know that there is obviously your own internal protocol as to how you make this decision. But I want to ask you, obviously, Belizeans are very aware as to what's taking place in the United States, and we know that the current administration has a very strong stance on immigration. Has that impacted the number of visas or the protocol that you're now going through in terms of screening people?
We have seen a little bit of a drop off in terms of the number of people applying. I can't attribute that to one thing or another. In terms of the essential law, it has not changed. There has been certain changes with protocols for certain countries. There's been some proposed changes to the application form itself.
Yeah.
But in general, the law stays the law, which is if you're going for a temporary visit and you can demonstrate that you have strong ties to your home country and that your activities in the United States are in line with the visa class that you have, you qualify for the visa. And so that essentially stays the same. We see, sometimes there's rumors on Facebook, Belize is limited to this number of visas this year,
Yeah.
or they're canceling all visas
So
for
there's been
Belize.
no change in terms of the number of visas that you were now allowed to approve?
No, none at all, none
Okay.
at all.
So the only changes we have seen is the agriculture temporary workers permit and the end of the green card lottery.
The diversity visa lottery, well,
Yeah.
yeah, so that program has not actually ended yet. There's still discussions going on. So the diversity visa lottery is still a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, and then let's try to clear up the single entry visas because there are a lot of folks who would get visas and probably you get a year, but it's a single entry visa, and we don't understand. You know what? I can't go back with a single entry. Try to clear that up for us. What does this mean?
Right. So single entry, it means exactly that. You can enter the one time. You can, of course, leave the United States after that. You don't need a certain permit to leave the U.S. But a single entry would be given if the officer determines that the person's qualifications are sufficient for the particular trip that they're talking about, but they otherwise might not qualify for travel to the United States. And honestly, those are very rare. We don't issue too many single entry visas these days. So the vast majority of cases, it's going to be a multiple entry visa. Sometimes visas are limited. They might be limited to a year, might be limited to 5 years. But generally speaking, you're going to get, if you qualify for a visa, you're going to get a 10-year multiple entry visa.
Wow.
One other thing that I just want to mention is that getting back to the issue of people using their visa correctly or traveling within the correct visa class.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that things that you want to do in the United States are allowed on that type of visa. So one example is performances. If you're going to the US as an artist, as an entertainer, as a performer, you can't do that on your typical B1, B2 tourist visa. And people can get in trouble with that. They can get turned around at the port of entry, and we don't like to see that. So if you are going to the US for a performance, even if you're not being paid for that performance, you need to get what's called a P visa, a performer's visa, and that has to go through the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. They approve a petition, and then you can get that particular visa to travel for those performances. But we want to make sure that whenever someone's traveling, whatever they're doing on their visa is what's allowed on that type of visa.
If I have a 10-year multiple visa and a multiple entry visa actually, and I buy a one-way ticket, does this show some kind of red flag?
It's gonna depend on your circumstances. If you have a reason if you can explain why you only have a one-way ticket, that's fine. I mean, we're not asking you for plane tickets when you're applying for the visa. That's we don't expect people to buy their tickets before they apply for the visa. But it's going to be up to the officer at the port of entry to determine if your purpose of travel in the U.S. is credible.
Speaking of tickets now, I'm sorry, this is, speaking of tickets, if I'm probably taking my daughter up, she doesn't have a visa. If I buy a ticket, does this give me give her a better chance of getting a visa because I bought the ticket before I went in for the visa?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, you're really the visa interview, it's about your ties to Belize, and it's about your purpose of travel. And as long as we're convinced that what you're doing in the United States is allowed and your ties to Belize are good that are going to cause you to come back, then that's what's going to get you the visa. A lot of people think there's certain tricks that they can do. There's certain, well, if I buy this or I bring this, bring my land certificate or bring, my cousin in LA's job letter or something like that. There's a lot of those things. Don't worry about that. Just worry about being able to, and people get nervous. We understand that too. A lot of times their reaction is reach for the paper, reach for the letter. Oh, it says where I'm going here. It says how long I'll stay here. I want to talk to you. I'm here for the interview. I'm spending that time. I want to ask you the questions.
And let's talk about the implications of the family, the ties that you do have in the U.S. Obviously there's a section that you talk about listing all the relatives that you have. Some people may not want to claim some relatives. What's your advice on that?
Well, again, just be honest. If you have relatives in the United States, please list them. It doesn't necessarily prejudice your decision one way or another, because we know that there are lots of family ties between the U.S. and Belize. Lots of people have family in the United States. That doesn't hurt them. We don't penalize people for what their relatives have done, as long as we can understand the situation. And sometimes people will say, well, my brother's in the States or my dad's in the States, but we're really not in contact. I don't know him. That's not who I'm going to see.
Yeah.
My dad's in the States, but I'm actually going to see my aunt in Chicago, not my dad who's in LA. And that's fine, as long as it makes sense, as long as they can explain what the situation is, that's perfectly fine. One thing I'd like to get a plug for, if you don't mind, we are actually going to be hosting a town hall meeting in Belize City on May 5th. It's going to be at the Radisson Fort George Hotel from 10 a.m. to 12, and that's a Saturday. And actually, I'll be there answering more visa questions. So if viewers are out there and they have more visa questions, there's things that we don't cover today, they are more than welcome to come to the town hall at the Radisson, and I'll be happy to answer their questions then. And we'll also be offering U.S. citizen services. We'll be offering passport services. We know there's Belizean parents out there who have children who were born in the U.S. If they need to renew their passport, it's a great opportunity for them to come in. They can ask us about visas, and they can get their child's passport renewed at the same time.
So you're really working on demystifying this process, aren't
Absolutely. We're trying to do as much outreach as possible. And if there's groups, if there's schools or organizations out there that would like us to give a presentation, or if they have questions, please do contact us at the embassy. You can write to Consul Belize at state.gov. And we'll be more than happy to talk with you and see if maybe we can do a presentation to your group or your school. We're doing some outreach this month, going to visit some colleges to talk about student visas in the U.S., and we're more than happy to reach out and see what we can do perhaps later in the summer.
Now, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was the student visas, because I know that this can oftentimes be one of the greatest challenges for parents, especially when their children are going off to college, because there's so much information that has to come in from the school itself. Some people are waiting on scholarships, some people are sourcing funding and need to be able to submit that to the school, and all of these things, I should say, the list of things to do can be very extended. When is the best time to go in for the student visa?
The visa is really the last part of the process. You really have to have selected your school, been accepted by your school, you've enrolled in the SEVIS system, you paid all of your fees, you've received what's called your I-20 form. That's the form that comes from the school that says exactly what your program of study is and how much it will cost and all of those things. So really the last step in the process is the student visa, and you can do that.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with that because I know, obviously, so when you wait on all this information to come from the school, maybe your bank finally approves your loan, whatever it is, and you are now on a very strict deadline. Maybe there's no appointment available. What can someone do to be able to perhaps get their urgent case before the visa counselor?
Of course. We actually set aside a certain number of appointments just for students every day throughout the entire year.
Wow.
So that those are just for students. So if they're in a rush, and we have very low wait times at the embassy in Belmopan. Really, it's very uncommon that you wouldn't be able to get an appointment the same week.
Okay.
But if it's really an emergency, if you're really fighting a deadline, we do have expedite requests. You can request to have an expedited interview either at during a regular interview time, or even sometimes we can accommodate people outside of the regular interview times to try and get them, because we know school is important and we want to make sure that those students get to the U.S., they don't miss their classes, so that they can do great things.
Definitely. And in terms of having your visa and jeopardizing your time in the U.S., and I'm saying this because there are a lot of times you probably, with a cousin, you run a red light, you end up, you're so innocent, you end up getting arrested as well because of his mischief. Does this jeopardize one's visa when you're trying to reapply?
It's going to depend on the circumstances. I know I'm saying that a lot, but every case is really unique. But again, this takes me back to the importance of being honest. So if you disclose that arrest, if you can explain it, you bring in your police certificate, you bring in your court papers, you can say, this is what happened, this was the circumstances, and if you're honest about it, then potentially you can still have your visa issued. It doesn't mean that it's an automatic denial. There are certain things which create actual ineligibilities that we're by law prevented from issuing a visa. You know, certain things with drugs, certain things with certain kinds of crimes that we just can't. Our hands are tied. We cannot issue a visa. But there's many circumstances where someone has a minor infraction, they can explain it, and we can issue the visa. And it's really important to be honest about that, because if we find out later through another source, if we determine that the person wasn't being honest, it really can destroy their credibility. And that's what's going to prevent them from getting the visa, not the fact that they ran a red light.
Now, I know drug-related offenses are very serious. Are you talking about offenses made in the U.S. or also in Belize?
Under the U.S. law, it can be in the U.S. or Belize or any other country.
Yeah. So even if I was caught with a stick of marijuana 5 years ago, when it was still a crime.
Yeah, that can potentially be an ineligibility in the United States.
But I may potentially still, it still is a good idea to apply, or?
It's going to depend on your circumstances again,
But I have
unfortunately.
lesser chances,
yeah,
don't I?
Yeah. It's not going to help, let me put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about overstaying?
Overstaying is another issue. So it doesn't, anytime someone overstays their visa, that's a problem. If you are in the United States and for some reason there's really exigent circumstances, there are ways to apply through the Department of Homeland Security for an extension of your status. But if someone has overstayed, especially if they've overstayed for a significant amount of time, that can create some of those bars that I talked about before, where we cannot issue you a visa if you've overstayed for a certain amount of time. Now, those bars do expire after 3 years or 10 years, depending on what the circumstances were and how long you stayed. But the point is, it's your responsibility. If you're going on a visitor visa, it should be a temporary visit. You know, there's really not too many reasons why someone should be staying beyond 6 months in the United States, or beyond the time that they're allowed by the officer at the port of entry.
We just have a bunch of questions coming in.
Yeah.
So obviously your town hall is going to be effective. And I know the overstaying was one of the questions, but also you spoke of the interview waiver going in to renew your visa. Do you have to wait until it's officially expired for you to be able to apply?
Not at all. We welcome people to apply before their old visa's expired. There's no limit on it. You can apply a year before your visa's expired.
Oh, really?
It's totally up to you. Sometimes people, their passport will expire and they don't want to carry the two passports around. And so they'll say, oh, well, I'll just renew my visa early. And we're perfectly happy to accept that. Or sometimes someone, water spilled on their passport, it went through the laundry, something like that, and the photo on their visa is no good anymore. Go ahead and submit it through the Dropbox and we can issue you a new visa.
So it's
If
actually
I get mine's damaged, do I reapply all over again?
It depends on the type of damage. What you can do is send us an email with a screenshot of it, and you can ask us, and we can kind of advise you. The reality is, it's up to the officer at the port of entry to determine is the photo still clear enough. If there's any significant damage to the photo or to the machine readable zone at the bottom of the passport, that's that series of numbers at the bottom of the visa, that's going to be a real problem. So feel free to send it in to us and ask, but we generally recommend, if there's damage to your visa, you're going to want to reapply.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I wanted to get some clarification on: reapplying or renewing.
So really, there is no such thing as renewing your visa. Every application is treated as a new application. If you have had visas in the past, if you have a good record of travel, if you still have strong ties to Belize, there should be no reason why you can't be issued a new visa. But the reality is, circumstances change. I mean, over 10 years, my life now is very different than it was 10 years ago. And so people's circumstances change. Just because you were issued a visa before doesn't necessarily mean you qualify now.
You just become a bad person in 10 years.
No, but that's a great point. This is a myth that if you don't get a visa, it's because you're a bad person or we think you've done something wrong. And sometimes it's not about that at all. It's just about you can't necessarily at that time show the ties that are going to bring you back after a temporary visit. And
So it's
circumstances
not about
change.
Rob's mood for the day.
No. I try and be in a good mood. I try and be pleasant when I'm at the window. Have a nice sunshiny demeanor.
Yeah, no, I mean,
That's a very good point.
This is similar to picking immigration booths when you're at the airport.
right.
You try to look for the person who looks a bit more pleasant.
Yes.
But the truth is, all of us, all the officers, we have multiple officers in the section who do interviews, and we all follow the same laws.
Okay.
We're all trained the same way. We all have the same procedures. We talk to each other. We have regular meetings about our adjudications and about the way, so we're always trying to be really consistent. And so some people say, oh, I didn't like that guy with the beard. I'm going to try again and see if I can get somebody else and see if the blonde lady will give me the visa this time.
Yeah.
The reality is, if you got denied last week and your life circumstances are the same this week, you may not want to apply again. We strongly urge people to wait until their circumstances have
But
changed.
you have to wait 6 months before reapplying?
No, that's not
No?
true.
Oh, another myth.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
another myth for you. Thank you for bringing that
Yeah.
up. No, if you have, if it was just a regular refusal, what we call a 214B refusal, that's a section of the law that it's under, where it was just about ties. If it's not about a criminal ineligibility
But
or
are
an
you
overstay.
aware, are you informed as to why you're refused the visa?
Well, what we do is we give you a letter which explains a section of the law
Okay.
under which you were refused. We don't necessarily get into all of the details about what the specific circumstances were, and that's partly because we don't want to coach people on, like, oh, well, he said was what was wrong with my application. I'll just come in and I'll change that answer
Yeah.
next time on my application. And it may be a number of different things. There may be a number of different issues. But the point is, if your circumstances didn't qualify you for a visa this week, don't think that just because you're seeing a different officer, you're going to get a different answer next week. So
And if
do
I
wait.
forgot to put the parking ticket or the red light issue last week and I want to go back 3 weeks from now and try again, but put it on the application form?
You can do that, but the next officer is probably going to wonder why you left it off the first time, right?
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Because we see each
Honesty
other's
is the most important, yeah.
Honesty is absolutely the most important thing. We do look at past adjudications. We do look at each other's notes. And that's the other thing. People sometimes, they come in and they say, "Oh no, I've never been to the United States before," and I'm looking at a picture of you in the United States. You have to know that these things can catch up with you, and so
Yeah.
it's really important to just be honest and straightforward.
What are some of the common things that you meet here in Belize that you want folks to know that you know what, don't do it, and it's always being done there? Some of the common things that you meet on a daily basis with Belizeans going in there to say.
The most important things: don't overstay your visa, don't commit any crimes, and don't break the law while you're in the United States. Don't drive without a license, no drunk driving, any of those kinds of things. Don't work if you don't have work authorization in the United States. If you have a tourist visa and you're working in the U.S., sometimes people think, "Oh, well, I'm just helping. My cousin has a remodeling business. I just went into this house with him for a few days, put up some drywall." No.
That's working.
That's
What
work.
about helping your child with a new, your family member with a new baby?
That if you're not being paid, if you're not working, that's allowed. You can go visit, and your child just had you just had a new grandchild in the U.S. You want to go take care of them. Of course, grandma can babysit for a few weeks or whatever it is. But the point is, you shouldn't be doing it as a job. You shouldn't be babysitting. You shouldn't be a professional nanny while
And
you're in the United
that's
States.
just based on whether or not you get paid for it.
When you're talking about childcare, that's the main thing.
Yeah.
But in general, the requirement, whether you're working in the United States, is not just based on whether you're getting paid. The performer example that I gave before, you can go give a free concert in the United States. You're not allowed to do that on a tourist visa. There's certain types of volunteering. If you're staying with family and just helping out your family in a domestic setting, those sorts of things are allowed. But if it's anything that would constitute work, if it's anything that someone would hire someone else to do, that's
Yeah.
not allowed on a tourist visa. And the other thing is, if you have medical treatment, you can go to the U.S. on a tourist visa for medical treatment,
Okay.
absolutely. But you have to be able to demonstrate that you're going to be able to pay for it.
Yeah.
So either out of your own funds, or if you have insurance, it's really important that you can show that you're paying for it, because if you're using U.S. public funds, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, WIC, any of those programs, those are only for U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, green card holders. And so a lot of people get in trouble because they're using public funds that they're not entitled to.
What if I'm pregnant and I want to go and apply for a visa?
If you want to have your baby in the United States, you're welcome to do so if you can show that you can pay for it.
Yeah. But what if I just want to visit within my last trimester or?
As
There's a
long
wedding
You
as
coming
will,
up.
you
as
will
long-
be asked
Yeah, there's
about
a wedding
whether
coming up,
you're
a
trying
funeral,
to have
yes.
the baby there.
If you can explain it, and if your purpose of it's all about what is your purpose of travel. If you're going to do something that you're allowed to do, visa will be issued. If the officer has doubts about your intent in the United States, we
Yeah.
don't issue the visa. That's
But I
That's what it
can
comes down.
legitimately get a visa with you knowing that I'm going to go give birth
Yes.
there. Once I can prove I can pay for my medical bills.
yes, that is possible. Yep.
Possible.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, let's take a moment, because you're right. There are quite a number of people living in Belize who were born in the United States, using that question. What's some of the advice that you can give people in terms of applying for their U.S. passport, and what documentation, what process they go through?
Well, certainly we want to make sure that anyone who's a U.S. citizen is documented as a U.S. citizen. And sometimes parents are afraid, they don't want to bring in their kids to the embassy, they're worried about what will happen to their visa, their things like that. It's really important if your child is a U.S. citizen or if you're a U.S. citizen to make sure that you have a valid U.S. passport. You never know if there's going to be an emergency, whether it's a medical emergency for yourself or, as you mentioned, a funeral or a wedding in the United States that you need to travel urgently. So we do encourage everyone, make sure that your kids are documented, that you have those passports. And by the same token, if a child is born in Belize to a U.S. citizen, they may qualify for U.S. citizenship by descent. So please go ahead, make an appointment at the embassy for a consular report of birth abroad, and you can apply for that certificate, which will show that that child is a U.S. citizen from birth. But as far as documentation, if they were born in the U.S., the main things are their birth certificate and the parents' identification.
Okay, so a couple more questions here. One, what if you don't know anyone in the U.S. and you just want to visit?
You can, sure. I mean, sometimes people just want to go shopping. Sometimes people just want to go to Disney. As long as their story is credible, as long as their purpose of their visit makes sense, and they can show that they have those good ties to Belize, and they can fund their travel in the United States, then they're fine.
Okay.
You're getting the questions there.
We're doing our own town hall here, aren't we?
Coming in.
And there's also the question about, I think it's fiance or marriage. There is a special visa for fiance, and then what to do if you get married to a U.S. citizen.
So there is a fiance visa if you are planning to marry a U.S. citizen and you want to go to the United States for the wedding. There's a special procedure that you have to follow. It's similar to an immigrant visa, but it's not quite an immigrant visa, wherein your fiance, your U.S. citizen fiance, has to file some paperwork with the Department of Homeland Security and sponsor you. Similarly, if you marry a U.S. citizen here in Belize and that U.S. citizen wants to sponsor you for a green card in the United States, you have to go through the process. A tourist visa is not a fiance visa. If you're planning to go to the United States to get married on a tourist visa, that's not a proper use of your visa.
So you shouldn't use your tourist visa to get married
in the U.S.
in the U.S. Yeah.
Right.
To a U.S. citizen.
To a U.S. citizen, or I mean, I might question if you're going to the U.S. to marry anyone. Why are you getting married in the U.S. as opposed to somewhere else? But it's, again,
so if you are going to get married, you want to get the fiance visa instead, and that has the application process involves the U.S. citizen that you're getting married to.
Yes.
And when you're married and you want to apply for a passport, married to a U.S. Citizen.
Well, if you're married to a U.S. citizen and you want,
I'm sorry, yeah.
If you're married to a U.S. citizen, that U.S. citizen can petition. Again, they have to file paperwork with the Department of Homeland Security. That petition has to get approved. There's a whole process that it goes through, and then you can get an immigrant visa, which would allow you to travel to the U.S., and then you'll be issued your green card, and you become a lawful permanent resident of the United States. And after 5 years in the U.S., you can apply for naturalization and become a U.S. citizen. But there is a process to go through. Just because you're married to a U.S. citizen, that does not entitle you to a visa. A lot of people, there are people who are married to U.S. citizens here, and they just want to go for a visit, and that's fine, and they can apply for a visitor visa. But they have to demonstrate that their ties to Belize are stronger than their ties to the U.S., just like anyone else.
And once again, because you're having the question, what do you classify as strong ties to Belize?
You guys are going to hate this answer.
I'm going to tell you
this.
Your town hall will obviously be successful. We should remind people that there is an open session for people, because we won't be able to ask all your questions as they come in. So you will be able to meet Rob personally and many others to ask them questions May 5th at the Radisson.
May 5th at the Radisson, 10 a.m. And also the other great resource we have is our call center. So we have our website. You can go to the embassy website. You can go directly to the visa website. And we have a call center. It's 0800 017 2599. I believe we've got it up on the screen there as well. You can call. They can answer all your questions about how to apply for a visa, what the fee is. If you're having trouble with the online application, whatever your issues are, they can answer those questions for you. And again, we will be happy to answer your questions at the town hall on May 5th. And since we were talking about U.S. citizen services, I'm just going to give another quick plug. For U.S. citizens who are interested in voting in the United States, we're going to have a voting assistance workshop on April 25th in Belmopan at the George Price Center. That'll be from 1 to 3 p.m.
Okay.
A team is coming down from the U.S. and they're going to help U.S. citizens with registration and with absentee voting. So
All right.
for any U.S. citizens living in Belize who want to vote in upcoming elections, please come to the George Price Center on April 25th, 1 to 3 p.m.
All right.
And
all
the strong ties question?
Oh,
We
and
won't,
back to-
you'll
yeah,
get
so-
away from
I
that.
was gonna get
can't
away.
wait to hear
I
it.
was this close. No, it's the same answer I give for every, it depends on the individual. So there can be all sorts of ties. You can have your economic ties, your job, your business. You can have social ties, your family, your school. Everyone thinks that there's not tick boxes, there's not a list that we have to go through. And he's got a job.
Loan check.
Exactly.
Children, check.
What we want to see is, does this person have a good reason to come back after a temporary visit to the United States? And are we convinced that they're not going to do those other things? They're not going to work in the U.S. They're not going to use public funds in the U.S. They're not going to break any laws while they're in the U.S.
Yeah.
If we're convinced of those 4 things, then the person qualifies for a visa.
All right. We have to close off
Yeah,
the Q&A
we're
at this
totally
point.
out of time.
But again,
Great questions, though. I mean, you've got an awesome
they're
audience
flooding
here.
in. Obviously,
Really,
there
you get some
it was important to
interested viewers.
demystify this process. But I think you brought out some really important points that I think people are not aware of. 1, you don't need to take documents. 2, if your child is under 14, you do not need to take them in for the interview. If you're applying for an elderly person, or an
79.
elderly person is applying, 79 and above,
above.
Yep.
you can skip the interview process and only do online. They're not required to come in for interviews.
Yep.
There's a fiance visa that you need if you're marrying a U.S. citizen in the U.S. And most importantly, be honest.
Yes.
Because they have all the information in their computer anyway. No, he didn't
And
say
no
that.
selfies.
Right?
Yeah. And no selfies. Remember, no
No
selfies. Make sure those
in your
photos.
passport photos. There's a purpose. They still have this service available. There's a call center that you can call
Toll
if you
free,
have
yeah?
problems
Yes.
with your
Toll free.
application. So make use of it as well. And if there's something we just didn't touch on that you really want some advice on, or if you just want to hear more information, there's a town hall. And once again, you can give me that info.
Yes. And that's May 5th at the Radisson, 10 a.m. to 12. Please, it's open to anyone. It's open to the general public. So please come with your visa questions. U.S. citizens, please come to renew your passports. And we're looking forward to seeing you there.
All right.
All
So we
right.
should stick a stone in that getting a visa is not a luck thing.
Yeah.
Because people say it's luck.
It's not luck. It's not random.
It's not how smiley the consular is.
No, it's not. It's not whether I've had my coffee that morning. It's about there's very specific laws that we have to follow, and that's what we base our adjudications on.
And there has been no limitation set on a number of visas that will be approved for Belize.
Exactly.
All right, Rob.
Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to a young Belizean entrepreneur about his product, Mahogany Shades. That's coming up after the break this week.